everybody. I'm Becky, and I'm here to tell you the inspiration behind our organization. Starting a long time ago, right here in this spot. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who loved to twirl. In fact, she remembers twirling in this spot for maybe 20 minutes once, right here in the backyard. And then we can keep going this way. This was our backyard, this beautiful, idyllic place that I got to grow up, and I loved it then, and I love it more every day, and I love to share it with whoever can come here. So here we go. We're going to look in the gardens, which need a little more weeding. And here's the backyard. We're heading over to our cute schoolhouse. We have a dye garden here that's in process. That's woad blooming right now, that beautiful yellow stuff. And let's take a look at our little schoolhouse. Let's see if we can find anything of interest there. What more inspiration for a little girl who likes to twirl? Check this out. Oh, they're twirling their little wings. Oh, and here's something that twirls. Look at all these pretty colors. Pretty colors, pretty shapes. Ooh, we all were surrounded by pretty colors and shapes. These twirl, but of course you can take it apart and play with it. So many colors and shapes. Oh, look at the pretty colors here. Ooh, it's an instrument. What fun is that? We're going to come over here with this. Oh, it's a stop. We got to stop at the stop sign. And these twirl. Whee! And we can put the no parking sign together. These little toys actually have inspired the looms that I am designing, that my husband and I are making, because the way they go together so nicely and easily, it's kind of fun. Oh, here's a toy that twirls. It's a little sewing machine that really sews. And what have we got here? Ooh, this rolls and things fit inside things, and that's a beautiful, fun thing. All these inspirations with colors and shapes. Here's my favorite. Let's get close up to this one. Because look, you can put these in their little spots. They're different colors, they're different shapes. Who knew that later on, when I started weaving, it's all about colors and shapes. I played with this so much. And look at the little keys, can turn these up and down. And so it's part of inspiration at the very beginning. Here we are at the dye garden, and growing up we had spent a lot of time outside, and weeding was an important part of that. 5 cents an hour. It's supposed to be incentive to make us want to weed. I'm not sure it really worked, but it actually did work, because you get to be out here, you're messing with plants, you're pulling them up, and so weeding was a big part of life growing up. We'll visit the garden later on. So we were just talking about 5 cents an hour for weeding, which brings us to the business end of things. And let's see, we've got a cash register here. We played store a whole lot. And that got me all ready for having a big fancy weaving store, which I do have now with yarns and things. And also, always loved books. I've never been that good at reading, I have to admit. Didn't even go to college. But look at all those books. I love books. These are mostly weaving books. And I loved them as a little kid as objects. And look what I did. This 7 Little Postmen is actually a favorite. And I turned them all into library books. And so this last got checked out May 22, 1969. But we're going to check it out today because it's such a good little book. Oh, and the Little Red Caboose. That's a good one. We're going to check that one out. May 22, 69. I guess there was some activity in my library. I was always begging people to come and check things out in my library. I'll pick the bunnies. And so I did this to all of my books, only of which you see a few right here. But I put little pieces of construction paper in the back with checking out cards. And then you have to get after people to return the books. That was fun too. As I started getting older, the toys started to change for the little girl who liked to twirl. And look, this is my very first loom. I still have it. You would take this raffia stuff and wrap it on the pegs like a big spider web. And then with this needle, you take another piece and you weave in and out and around and around and around. Speak of twirling. And my dutiful mother, I gave these presents to her, and she used them for a very long time, and now I still have them. These are my very, very first weavings on my very first loom. And then I started to get way grown up, and I got a big person's loom, a little big person's loom, and I had so much fun with this. Look at this, the shafts go up and down. And little did I know at this stage of my life, this is in fact a little Swedish loom. I didn't know that was going to become a huge part of my life, working on these Swedish looms, but I had fun with that. Then when I got bigger, the toys keep getting bigger, and the twirling, though, continued. The little girl continued to be able to twirl. Look at this. It's going around and around. I'm winding a bobbin, and this is messing up. But things mess up. We know about that. Maybe if I put it that way. Okay, there we go. So twirly, 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 twirly. Lots of fun to be had there. Here is a swift and a ball winder. Any weaver that uses skeins knows that you have to do a lot of twirling. So I've gotten my happy twirling's worth. So that goes around like that. What else twirls in my world of weaving? Here's a warp mill. We twirl it around. And look at these big toys we get to use. It's our beautiful warp mill that we've actually designed ourselves. It twirls beautifully. So when you get older, you can let other things do the twirling, and then you don't have to do as much of it yourself. So there's that. What else? This is a form of twirling on this big loom here. We're winding a warp. Look at this, twirls around this big wheel. This is really fun too. As many of you know, maybe not all of you, all of these sticks back, and we just keep winding and winding. Long warp on the loom, getting ready for weaving. We were taught to sew by our mother at a young age, and it was always really hard and something you kind of dreaded having to do. But boy, what a useful skill that really be good if everybody knew the basics of how to sew and how to use a sewing machine. This was my great aunt's sewing machine. It's an old Bernina. It's a wonderful machine. I'm very lucky to have it. We've just pulled the bobbin thread up, and I've done a lot of hemming of my hand-woven napkins, so we'll just, so I've got the two folds there. We go forward, we go back, and then fold it over twice, tuck everything in, offset it a little so that it lines up perfect. Hopefully when the needle mushes everything forward, little tricks you learn from experimentation. But thank you to our mother who knew how important some of these basic skills are, and she incorporated them into our lives along with a lot of magical things. We did a lot of different art activities and craft activities. She kept our hands busy from an early age, and so all of us did a lot of handwork, including, take a look here, and my sister made this beautiful teacup pincushion for me. I mean, just look at it. It's a little bit of woods. It's a bear in the woods. And this is Baba Yaga's house. It's a house on chicken feed, if you know the Russian tale about Baba Yaga. So we all grew up with a lot of handwork and creativity, and it's something that I always cherish, having had that in my youth. Welcome to the upstairs of our barn. We've had so many wonderful parties up here, and so sad you can't join us this year. But if you can look over the edge here down below, if you imagine no looms and lots of people dancing and lots of music. We have our old decorations up from last year. We haven't decorated for this year, obviously. And here are some tables. People can sit around here. You can munch on snacks, see what's going on down below. And this is our sort of cozy living room area. We've got a few photos here of these murals. My mother and I would have so much fun for weeks before our barn dances in the 90s. These are life-size murals. Those are the stairs going upstairs. Here's a big camel, and here's his leader and a palm tree. And then here we have 3 Bulgarian women doing some kind of ritual. And again, they're life-size. We made these out of clothing and fabrics and more palm trees, a village in the background. So we just had so much fun decorating, creating a magical space for people to come together and just feel just a wonderful warmth of being together, and really how important that is. And people that came to those parties years ago, they still talk about it to this day. So I really know that it's so valuable. This brings us to a very special tour that I've set up for you to show you what I did in my teen years that was very formative, great for my manual dexterity and for my brain. We'll talk about that more in a bit. But here's a little rope bed. I turned these legs on a little miniature lathe. I wove the coverlet, a miniature overshot coverlet. Here's a trunk. Our house was full of antiques, so I was always walking around the house to see, well, what can I copy? There's a little flap that opens for that side cubby. We've got sheets and blankets in the blanket chest. Here's a hutch cupboard, a copy of our own hutch cupboard that I was always so fond of, and which I have now, and I treasure it, and I think of these little miniature, I made several miniature hutch cupboards that were replicas of it. Here's a little table. Some of you may have heard of the Sloyd movement, which is a Danish movement that more from the turn of the last century, but it engaged children in doing woodworking, making things in order to develop their brains. And I feel like what I gained from making all of these miniatures was just huge. And I was fascinated later in life to learn about the Sloyd movement. That's what my father was even familiar with the term in grade school. They said, oh yeah, they called woodworking Sloyd. It's a Scandinavian term. This is a cute little blanket chest that's a copy of one that we have, but my mother would always tell us about the big one that I have. She did these paintings on the original, and so I made a copy of that piece that she painted as a little girl, which was just a real treasure to me. And now we've got the really little stuff. Let's just look at a few of these things. Here's a tray, nice antique-y kind of tray. There's a pair of bellows to blow air on the fireplace. There's a little lantern. So I liked using all different kinds of materials. I would collect junk, metal and wood and paper and who knows what else. There's a little baking pan. Ooh, and then why not have little bread pans? Those were fun to fold up in ways. And what else is in this box? Lots of cutting boards. I went into production for a while, some of these little production cutting boards. There's a little knife with a blade and wooden handle. There's another little knife. And ooh, here's a ruler. I'm not sure what that's doing in here. Oh, and then we have crocheted pot holders. Why not have little crocheted pot holders? Here is a napkin holder. So you see there was no time for TV. There were too many little cute things to make. And what else do we have? Oh, these are fun, little sponges for cleaning up afterwards. But when I did find one of these, this was I don't know if it'll stand up anymore. The base fell off, but it's a little goblet. You can see I used glass tubing and blew the glass a bit and stretched it and cut it, but it's not behaving. So there's other stuff. I made heaps of little things. This is just a little smattering of some of those fun things. but I feel like this was very nurturing for me, and this is what we need to encourage all of our youngsters to get involved with, using their hands, developing their brains, and just getting excited about things, because it really sets a great foundation for the rest of their lives. So there's a little yellow house in back, our flax house, which I lived in for 13 years. We're going to visit that later. But out back of that house, we've got this nice frog pond. And we had so much fun here. Let's look for a frog. Do we see a frog? Ooh, I see a nice big one. Do you see this big one right here? Oh, he's so good. Ooh, he jumped. He'll come back. I see another one over there. I don't know if you can see him, but he's a nice froggy too. Ooh, there he went. Endless fun here in the frog pond. I came home from Setter Glanton Weaving School in 1981, not only with this wealth of textiles, but also an expanded passion for creating these textiles and for spreading the tradition further. Here we've got a nice damask tablecloth and fine linen, a monk's belt. These are all things that we did in those 5 months in Sweden. Here's a blanket. I even did a set of socks out of my loom waste, not to mention a set of socks out of somebody else's loom waste from the class at the time. They were a bit worn out. Knoll bending is a really kind of neat technique, ancient Viking technique. And here's some rose path, a first rose path, second rose path, a very fine overshot in single ply linen, tablecloth in single ply linen, some towels. And then this was an extra project at the end, a goose-eye tablecloth. And then these, I got to take a birch bark class over the weekend. My school offered a variety of different crafts on weekends, which is really a big inspiration for the creation of our Fabric of Life educational nonprofit, to learn other stuff. Birch bark baskets of different forms and kinds. And these are even some lace bobbins. On another weekend, I was allowed to use the lathe down in the basement of the school at the time. That school now has a big woodworking department, but I turned those on a little lathe. It was a lot of fun. And then towards the end of our program, there was another program going on. It was a 3-week linens class. So I got to watch from the periphery, but then we got to weave off some of the warps. There were little leftover warps, and oh, I was so excited to weave off some of these linens. And I really wanted to be able to attend that 3-week linen course sometime in the future. And 10 years later, I was lucky enough to go back to my same school in Sweden. And this is a piece of, with the weft is all hand spun linen. We did a fair amount of hand spinning. It's a 3-week course. We put on a lot of warps. There's a Smålandsväv. That's where I really learned how to do that. Here's another very fine overshot in single ply linen. Oh, this was a fun one, in all hand spun weft, a nice big sauna towel. Scrub the skin off that is loose after your Swedish sauna. And that one is a very delicate diamond pattern. That was a very fine single ply linen on 12 shafts, I think. And yet another one. We had a lot of looms set up, and we made a big variety of linen things. This is a sword opempta, hand spun weft, and then here was a 16 shaft twill that we got to do in a hand spun weft here, and the commercial weft there. And then here's an 8 shaft twill that also has hand spun weft, and this has hand spun weft. This is the finest warp I've ever woven with. That's a 40 singles linen, hand spun weft in a 10 shaft damask. And then this one was also a hand spun tablecloth. If you move it different ways, maybe you can see the pattern better, but an 8 shaft and 2 block. Well, this is one actually from 81. I should have shown this before, but this is an 8 shaft twill that was a leftover warp we got to weave on. And so I was really smitten by all of this weaving and being in Sweden, being inspired by the culture and being able to bring that home and share it with people has been one of the biggest joys of my life. One of my favorite pieces that we did in my school was actually this piece of fabric here that I made this dress out of. It was 4 meters of yardage in cotton plain weave, really fun to weave, and I sewed this dress by hand when I was at the school because we didn't have a sewing machine, but I got it done just in time to go to a really beautiful big dance in a big round dance barn on April 11. I still remember the date. I was so excited about it, so I got to do nice Swedish folk dances in this dress back then, and I think of that now when I wear it anytime today. So now we're going to go to a secret special place of mine. We're going to take you to the brook. The brook has been my friend for my entire life. The brook always makes me feel better if I need that, even if I don't need that. And it's a nice walk down here through the woods to get there. Lots of nice plants along the way, spring ferns. Now we're getting into the deeper part of the woods. It's cooling off a little. It was hot there in the field. It's already cooler. But on a really hot day, we've been working up a sweat. There's nothing better than coming down the road to the brook. This was an old road to a mill. There was a grist mill further down the brook a long time ago. So I always imagine the oxen that must have been dragging the carts down here full of flour. There's grist millstones still down stream away. But we're not going quite that far. Maybe you can hear the brook now. I can. I guess if I would only be quiet, you'd have a chance of hearing it. It's just such a beautiful view to look down at the water and the rock. One of the most peaceful places I know. And we all need peaceful places in our lives. And here we go, down the little trail. It was a hot day and we worked up a sweat. Nothing feels better. For a long time because I'm against the current. There's a hole here. Woo! Music has been such an important part of my life. As we know, piano lessons as a young child were very painful, but I'm so glad to have had them. When I was around 7, I realized my 2 sisters were being taken somewhere fun every Friday night, and I was being left at home because I was too small, but boy did I put up a temper tantrum. I remember to this day, and I actually won. I was a little surprised, but I was hustled into the car and off we went. And that first night at folk dancing, I just fell in love with the music. It was recorded music, mostly from the Balkans, from Eastern Europe, but all over the rest of Europe and other parts of the world as well. So a big indoctrination early on of all these different folk traditions and music. My sisters, while we're making folk dance costumes, and I joined in too, we really lived for folk dancing for all those young years through being a teenager. And then as a teenager, I started playing different instruments. I never played this one a lot, but I've played it some. Balkan brass bands just make beautiful music, and I have friends that are good at this. But here's a little bit. So that was fun to play around with. What else have we got here? I'm going to give you a little tour. Let's look up here. We have, there's a Croatian brach, a nice stringed instrument for playing melodies, and there's also a smaller version of that I didn't bring out that plays melodies. Here's a Macedonian tambura, another stringed instrument, a lot of fun to strum on. A Bulgarian tambura, all slightly different variations, slightly different music, but all similar. And here is a Bulgaria, which is a rhythm instrument for a Croatian band that I've gotten to play quite a bit, and that's really fun. Here's a special one. I'll play a little snippet of this, maybe. We'll see how this goes. The reed needs to be wet. I don't know if my mentor, George Chittenden, will see this, but I hope I don't embarrass myself. He taught me this tune so long ago. Nice big drum with a stick, a little stick and a big stick. And then a dumbek is another kind of little hourglass Eastern European drum. Very fun, decorative. Oh, and then look at this. I even made a little leopard skin case for the dumbek. All that sewing lessons that I didn't like. Look how useful they are. You can make yourself little leopard skin cases for things. And, ooh, I don't know if I dare play that, but here is a santuri, which is a Greek hammer dulcimer, a beautiful instrument it's very heavy, takes a lot of tuning, but when it's tuned up, it's just got a beautiful sound. So that has been fun. All of these instruments I got to study with some of the best people, best players at these Balkan camps, a Balkan camp on the west coast, one on the east coast. But you really have the advantage there of learning from some of the best players in the world and hearing them play and dancing to their music at night, which is just heavenly. Okay, here is a Bulgarian bagpipe. Let's see how this goes. It's a goat skin, a whole goat turned inside out. Goatskin gaida, it's called. It's a Bulgarian gaida. And here is something that I always wanted to spend more time with, and as with all of these instruments, but it turns out there is only so much time, and my time in the last decade or more has been more focused on my weaving school, so I haven't gotten to play with these things as much, but this is a Bulgarian folk fiddle called a gadulka, and just a beautiful haunting sound. Etc. I need to practice this one more if I'm going to play it in public again. I have played all of these in public in the past, whether I was ready or not. And then here, of course, is my accordion. We might pull that out to play you a tune in a bit, but that's a familiar large instrument. So this has been such an enriching part of my life, playing music in bands and at camps, and I've played a lot of gigs. It brings so much to people. It brings people together. It builds a community. And I feel like I've learned a lot about what we as human beings crave and need. We need to be together. We need to celebrate together to just enrich our lives in that way. It's a very positive thing. So that's what at Fabric of Life, our mission is to do some of the same kind of enrichment, and it can happen in so many ways. This is just one of them. Here's just a little snippet of a paravo, a Bulgarian dance tune. So another thing that I was just thinking about while playing this that I wanted to share with you is my experience playing in a band out in California for a camp called Folklore Camp. And I was in the band for about 20 years. It's 1 week of the year out in Mendocino, California. And for the second half of that, really the second decade of that, I was the music director for a band, for the band. It was a dance camp primarily, but there was a house band. And so I got to meet wonderful people, work with wonderful dance teachers and other wonderful musicians who would come and organize all the evening parties. And so all of that organizational work is really also a big help to me to see how to organize things, how to bring people together, how to make the magic happen for just people to be nourished by music and dance and community, as well as making things with your hands. It's all so vital to our existence. The piano has not always been my friend, but it's a very happy friend now. We were forced to take piano lessons when we were young, and I really didn't enjoy it at all. I didn't want to practice, but I am so grateful to have had them. So I definitely am an advocate of finding a great teacher and introducing kids to music at an early age. So I want to tell you the story about this little loom and how it inspired the beginning of my Vevstuga weaving school. This was lent to me by a woman that I met at a craft fair, a complete stranger. She told me she had this pretty big Swedish loom that she wasn't using and I'd be welcome to borrow it. And then when I picked it up and saw how cute it was, it's little as far as I'm concerned. It's the littlest Glamokra loom I've ever seen. But I brought it home, I set it up, and I was just overflowing with nostalgia for my school because they had little looms, not this little, but I just hadn't used a little loom. I was used to using this big 5-foot one, that's all I had. And it just reminded me of my school. It brought me right back there. And I was thinking, well, heck, I don't need to be a student in order to be a part of and even create that magical ambiance that I experienced over there in Sweden in 1981. And so that was really the beginning of deciding I can have a school. Why don't I start teaching classes in this very room, and we can bring people in. They can share the experience with each other and take this knowledge home and take the experience home. And it just felt like the right thing to do. Felt like a very nurturing kind of thing, both for me and for the students coming. In the process of developing my weaving school, starting out here in my own home studio, I realized how important it was to maintain communication with other students. So I had classes here, and then it was really when my friend Lydia took a class and she said to me, "Becky, you need a website," that I realized, yes, this probably is a good idea. I had been running, kicking and screaming 100 miles an hour away from doing email, and I still was, but okay, well, let's have a website. And I looked on here to see, it was back October 2003. If you want to read these old newsletters, they are on the website, so you can see what I was doing at the tender age of 33 at that time. And I've tried to make friends with the computer since then. It's always been a struggle because I really much prefer doing things with my hands and doing things with other people. But when I can make pretty things like this and work with designs, it's not so bad. But the typing has always been a problem. Reading and writing, even in school, was always a problem for me. I can't stay focused. I didn't go to college because I just don't do the reading and writing thing very easily. But then I went ahead and I made all these books. So where's that connection? I discovered that if I use a recording device to translate a book, I can stay awake, I can stay focused, I can actually take in the material in the book. I'm doing something physical with it, translating it. And so I've had a blast with putting these books together. This was the first one that I made. I actually recorded it on a cassette tape, and then it was transcribed. It's a drafting book, and I realized that was a really critical, necessary book for my students, and it has been, it still is to this day. This was the next one. Here was the Swedish book. When this came out, I thought, oh, that's the perfect textbook, but it's in Swedish. What do we do? So that was my next project, and that's a hands-on how to deal with the loom and set it up and finishing techniques. This is very theoretical about the threads going up and down. This is theoretical and hands-on on the loom. And then our flippy book, which step by step shows you how to dress the loom. That's not a translation, that's my own. But really the very first, before making that book, because I made, these are VHS videos. They're also now on DVD, which are out of date. Sadly now, we have to go to something else. Dress Your Loom the Swedish Way. It shows exactly how I was taught to dress a loom in Sweden, and the draw loom video, which a lot of people have hopefully gotten useful information from. And then this one, the old Swedish weavings from north to south. This woman, Doris Wiklund, she lives in northern Sweden. I got to be in touch with her nearly every day via email for a whole year. I visited her twice, once with my husband. We got to go skiing up in Lapland where she lives. Beautiful collection of weavings that she has analyzed. So we have weavings here to inspire different techniques. Here's theory of threads and hands on the loom. Those three really give you a great education. This one was translated by a dear friend of mine who's unfortunately no longer with us. And the author of this book I got to visit and take a workshop with in Sweden. And so I did a lot of editing here. Beautiful pieces from southern Sweden, very complicated. Beautiful pieces of artwork, really. And then this one is another thing my Vevstuga Press does. It's not only translations and new books. This is a republication of a book that has been out of print for a very long time that Lillemor Johansson put together. She used to be the editor of Vev Magasinet. And just a stellar book. It's wonderful to bring it back into print. And so we have other books in the works. And so this is an exciting part of my life. In fact, this is our newest book right here, hot off the press, just a few weeks ago. Bound plot vev coverlets. A very interesting technique and some fascinating history of these two brothers that perhaps invented this technique. So it's been a joy to work with the author who put this together. And so this is a brand new book. I can't wait to try out this technique myself. You caught me spinning in our flax house. This spinning wheel is one that I got as a kit to put together when I was about 14 because I was at a sheep and wool festival in Cummington and I watched a woman spin, I think for about an hour straight. I just stared at her. I was so fascinated. I came home and I begged and pleaded and I needed one and my parents acquiesced. And I have enjoyed it, and it seems to have found company because now we have a whole family of wheels in this little flax house. But this house has a special history for me because I lived here for 13 years, in my 20s I like to say. I had my kitchen over here, it's a little refrigerator, a sink with a hand pump which I had to thaw out mornings. And here's the stove hole. I had a big wood cook stove and I did lots of canning on that wood cook stove. Sometimes my loom, a big loom was right here. I could be weaving and then I could stir something on the stove. And my parents were very kind to let me move in. They didn't know I was going to stay 13 years. But I was very grateful to have this opportunity. It got a little small after a while. But now we've emptied it out and filled it up with other stuff. There's flax over there from the garden. And there are some flax tools on the wall. Here's some hackles, scutching stools, and scutching knives. And over here we've got flax breaks. So I've been growing flax for a long time and processing it. And I love sharing that because it's really just it's a fun thing. It's organic. You grow the stuff and it turns into string and yarn and clothing and tablecloths, and it's quite a miracle. So now I'm coming out my front door. I spent a lot of time sitting on those steps. Before these trees got so big it was a little sunnier. We're going to take a walk to the garden from here. This is a garden that I grew up with and I took it over when I was about 18. I didn't know what I was doing. A lot of things died, except the weeds did really well. But I did grow some vegetables. And then I took some time off and I was other places. But now we've brought this garden back to life. Very exciting. We get to walk by our cute little cabin. There's a fun place to hang out. And now we're coming up to our wheat. The last 4 years, I think this is our fourth crop of wheat. This is an ancient strain from a friend who collected it in Eastern Europe. And so it's very exciting to see that come up. It's big and bushy, and we've got peas coming up. This is garlic. We've got cabbages. One thing that we love to do here is during weaving classes serve what we call a farmhouse dinner, and we grow a lot of our own produce for that. The potatoes they're not really up yet, so it looks like a big weed patch, but they're starting to come up. That will get weeded next. And we've got onions and lettuce, tomatoes and peppers under cover, onions. There's going to be a lot of beans and squash and corn there, but this is a cute little row with kohlrabi and chard kale, and then some lettuce and radishes coming along. We have a lot of good time up here, and this is really a big part of the fabric of life, growing food for our own sustenance. So now we'll take the rest of the tour of the property here, of the yard. We're coming down from the garden, and we're going to come through the backyard. You can imagine this during a real barn fest. This whole yard is full of people and tents and activities and snacks. This is just a wonderful place for people to gather and to be together. But we'll at least give you a tour of the yard, since we can't invite you here. Some of you are probably too far away and you get to see the yard from wherever you are. We'll take a little peek at our nice pavilion, which is a timber frame building that was built as a Fabric of Life class. The timbers were hauled out of the woods down there with horses in March through the snow, and they were milled up with a sawmill down there, and this building was put together. The oven was another class. We had that built, and we have a very cool video for you to watch of that class. And so you can picture pizzas just coming out of that oven, and they're pretty scrumptious. And then we're walking over towards the barn, where we've had a lot of parties over the years. We do park the tractor there in the winter, but we also have weaving classes in there and broom making classes. And so that's a little bit of the tour. And then here's our nice farmhouse, 1850s era farmhouse, very typical for this area. And we do have some classes in there as well. You got to see some of our beautiful wheat growing in the garden, but we want to show you what it looks like when it's ready to harvest. Nice, tall, beautiful stalks. And it's just such a pleasure to see those grow. I mentioned we got the seed from a friend of ours, Ellie. She has a really nice book, Restoring Heritage Grains, that you can read about it. Here's a nice jar of our wheat. And it's a beautiful thing to eat, but not only to eat, because take a look at these rugs. This is the wheat straw that I've woven into a rug here and a little runner here. And not only that, our oven is made of mud that's mixed with our wheat straw as well. So we're baking our bread, hopefully right now, in this oven that's made of the wheat straw. And my dear husband, Lenny, I think he's about to find out if our bread is ready to come out of the oven. We did cheat a little bit, as you'll probably see. The loaf is not one of these nice round ones, but you can imagine beautiful loaves of bread coming out of that oven. Oh, that looks scrumptious. This is our own wheat. And we're going to see how that tastes in a little bit. So what's your relationship with wheat?
Well, this is actually very interesting for me, and I'm thinking of an event from my childhood. Many of my relatives, ancestors on my father's side of the family, were located in Heartland, Vermont. And my father would take us up there partly to visit cemeteries and find the headstones for our departed ancestors, which we did. There was also a property that was formerly owned by one of my, I guess, great-grandfathers, and the new owners have turned it into a grist mill, meaning that they would grind grain with an actual stone ground flour. And we visited there, and we came home with a little package. I remember in this case it was buckwheat, made pancakes out of it. But we also came back with a pamphlet. Now I think my father was sort of ahead of his time, because he really understood nutritious food and the importance of what we now call whole food as opposed to processed food. He grew up at a time where it was transitioned from a farming economy into the more modern economy. He honestly never quite adapted to the modern economy. And there was a word that the gristmill owners used, and I can't remember if it was a German word or a Dutch word, but basically the translation was the food was life energy, and that stuck with me. So here we have this wheat made from grain either grown around here or in fact in our garden, which I grind up in my flour mill, my grain mill, and it looks just so healthful, and I can't help but in a resonating sort of way look back to those visits up to Vermont and thinking of the way that the people operating that grist mill thought about food, and so it means something in that level. And sure, I could cut some up now.
Oh yeah, you could cut some up. And so now you've gotten an overview of a little bit of background from each of us and what we really endeavor to do going forward through our Fabric of Life 501c3 educational organization is to continue to provide just a nourishing environment in which people can come and learn. And what I've learned is even just in a short week, if it's the right thing at the right time, those experiences that people take home with them have a really huge lasting effect. You can have a week-long experience and it resonates for the whole next year or even much longer. Ooh, do we get to try the bread?
Oh, certainly. Yes. There you go.
And I don't want to
break it into pieces.
say goodbye without, ooh, delicious. So good. Without taking note that I've had so much help along the way. I'm incredibly grateful to my parents and my family for providing such a nourishing environment for me to grow up in. And also the school that I went to and learning such a rich tradition of hand weaving from generations back of knowledge, that generations ago this knowledge is being passed forward, and I think it's so important to continue to pass all sorts of knowledge forward from our forebears. And also a huge thank you to all the camps that I've been to, the dance and music camps, which provide this usually week-long magical experience, but it lasts all year, and in fact it lasts, for me, it lasts a lifetime. So we really want to continue forward with that kind of energy. And also a huge thank you to my staff at Ddora for running my business so well, because that's something that is just always kind of hard for me to wrap my brain around, and it lets me have time to be productive in other ways that are really much more suited to me, being creative and creating this Fabric of Life nonprofit that Lenny and I have founded together. And also a huge thank you to my board. We have a board of people who, many of which were integral to my dance parties here that I had in our barn years ago, integral to making them magical events. And even someone on our board was someone I knew when I was 11 years old from folk dancing. And then more recent people that I've met through my weaving classes, and they all really understand what we're trying to do here and to provide is programming that's going to be really nurturing to people of all ages, but especially to some of our younger folks who maybe haven't had such fortunate backgrounds.
So I always wanted to reflect a little bit on my childhood and how that really prepared me for the type of programming and interest and mission we have at Fabric of Life. Where I grew up, I lived in a situation which really required that we develop quite a bit of self-reliance. And to do so, when the house was built in the late 40s, we developed a part of it for a garden. I actually am one of the few people, probably of my generation, that has actually used a plow. This was pulled behind a tractor that was made out of a Model T Ford. There was a kit that you could do that. And we raised a fair amount of the vegetables we needed. But I think larger than that, we raised chickens. We did not do this as a hobby. They were a part of our sustaining our life. And we would get 50 chicks and raise them, and one at a time we would eat them, and of course we collected the eggs. Interestingly enough, I was the one selected to go catch the chicken. My dad would say, well, we're having chicken tonight, and I would go up and select one of the chickens. It was easy for me because I was young. I wasn't that big. They weren't afraid of me. Now, they should have been, but they weren't. So I was the one selected to select the chicken for dinner that night, and that was important. Another thing that we were involved in, again, part of our significant level of living by our own capabilities. My grandfather, who was from Norway, in fact, he was shipwrecked on Miquelon Island, which is off the south coast of Newfoundland. It's a bit interesting in that Miquelon Island, along with its neighbor St. Pierre, are the last remnants of actual French territory in North America. That was in 1916. He wound up coming to Boston, never went back to Norway, and he had a yacht. And we would go out into Boston Harbor and catch fish. Mainly we were interested in flounders. Sometimes he would come back with 100 of them and fillet them on the way back in. And again, this was part of my upbringing that really was formative. Also working. My father was a machinist. We had a machine shop in the basement very early on, 8 or 10 years old. My father would set up machining projects for me on the drill press or milling machine. So I became familiar with working with machinery and fabricating things. And to this day, I continue to do that. So that was very formative.
So we hope that you've enjoyed learning a little bit more about the beginnings of Fabric of Life and our backgrounds and what our motivation is to bring some of these kinds of experiences to a wider audience. Thank you for watching.
Thank you.